Satnam. My name is Guru Fatha Singh and I teach Kundalini Yoga. Today I'm going to speak about Kundalini Yoga and the path of the Buddha. The Buddha is a great compassionate soul. He started the Buddha path, and many Buddhists today. It's a path of mindfulness, a path of compassion, and it has quite a lot in common with our yoga practice of Kundalini Yoga. And it has some things also in contrast. The story of the Buddha, the great story of his enlightenment, is a story I share sometimes in my class. It's a beautiful story. Unfortunately, many people in Canada, I think in the world, don't know of the story. And the story of how the Buddha was born as a prince, and he was spoiled. His dad knew that he might lose him from the kingdom, that his son might become a saint instead. And so he just made life very, very comfortable for him. Until one day the Buddha was on a carriage, and he peeked out of the carriage, and as a young man for the first time he saw old age, which surprised him, because he'd never seen anyone who wasn't young and beautiful looking. And then he saw sickness. He'd never seen anyone who was not healthy. And then he saw death, and it shook him. It shook him to his bones, and it made him think deeply about what he was doing. So much so that he decided to leave the comforts of the palace and dedicate himself to eradicating suffering, which he had no idea how to do. He went and sat under a tree in the forest and said, "I'm not moving, I'm not eating until I figure this out." It's a beautiful story, such a dedicated man. The story goes that he sat, and though he hadn't been taught, he just sat with his mind and meditated as best he could. He watched his mind, and he watched, and he watched, and his body became weaker and weaker and weaker. And he had experienced many people who have a meditative practice too, doubt, self-doubt. In fact, even people without a meditative practice, they have self-doubt. And he got it in spades. And the doubt was, what are you doing? Why are you here? You've abandoned people who love you, people who are caring for you, people who are worried about you, and here you are starving yourself to death under a tree. What kind of life is this? What kind of gratitude is this? And but the Buddha, he was firm in his purpose, and he sat, and he sat, and he felt he was getting to where he needed to be, finding his inner strength even as his body dissolved. And finally the nagging of these voices and the nagging of the doubt was so big that he had to reply. And all he had the strength to do was to remove his right hand and motion toward the earth, touch the earth, and call the earth to witness that he was not meditating or putting on some show just for himself or his own personal self-interest, but he was doing it for the sake of all living beings. It's a beautiful story. And that's the beginning of his life, his mission, his realization that the mind plays a huge part in our happiness, plays a huge part in our peace or lack of peace on earth. My teacher shared a regional version of the Buddha story. My teacher was a feminist, and so there's a beautiful feminine aspect to this other version, which is that as the Buddha was sitting beneath the tree and getting skinnier and skinnier and coming closer and closer to death, there's a cowgirl, a milkmaid who was coming through the forest, and she saw him there, and she had just milked some cows, and she had some butter she had churned, and she saw this man very close to death, and she said, "What a shame. The man was going to die, and he would be better to live." And so going by, she opened his mouth and stuck the butter inside and revived him. From the nurture from that butter, he felt the nectar of life, the juice of living, the joy of being alive in his body again. And from that point, he dedicated himself to teaching the message of compassion, the message of mindfulness, the message of yoga, as he understood it, oneness with his mind as a meditative mind, as a mindfulness experience. There are some parts of this path and the path of Kundalini Yoga which do differ, however. The Buddhist path is a path of renunciation. The Buddhist belief is that the world is a place of suffering, and it's best to be a monk and to renounce all things, shave your hair. But the Kundalini Yoga path is a path of embracing the world, embracing its suffering, having living a householder's life, perhaps married, perhaps having little yogis raising them. In Kundalini Yoga, we recognize the divinity of childbirth, the divinity of motherhood, and the possibility, the spiritual possibility in bringing saints into this world. It's a different path. It's a path, when you're without anything, you have no money, you have no authority, you have no goods, you're shaven like a skeleton. There's not much you can do wrong. The scales of karma are much, much, much reduced. You're in a monastery and you're under the head of the monastery. Whereas if you're living with money, you have children, you have responsibilities, you live in the world, you have authority, you have a car, a house. Lots of things can go wrong, lots of things can go right. You can take your money and invest it in some good cause. If you're living in the world, you can also be very much engaged in social movements, movements for social justice, movements for a healthy environment, all kinds of things. And so as a Kundalini yogi, we're not warriors, we don't do retreats, but we are spiritual warriors. We're engaged in this world to make this world a better place. We believe that's why we were born, to be engaged and to be of service. And our meditation helps us to be of service. So I thank you very much. The Buddha lived a very beautiful, enlightened life, enlightened many lives. I'm happy to share his story and the story of Kundalini Yoga with you.